Once upon a time, the ability to draw was seen as the first and most essential skill of any artist. But in the age of the unmade bed and the pickled shark, drawing's widely perceived as an old-fashioned activity. Many modern art schools don't even teach it, preferring to arm their students with digital or video cameras. I'd like to challenge the tedious modern prejudice that it's trendy not to draw, and that those who do draw are sad reactionaries, stuck in a dead past. I think the exact opposite's true. Drawing is the single most fruitful and vital artistic skill at work in the world today. Over the next few weeks, I'll try to show how drawing lies behind almost everything around us in the modern world. After all, the building I've just been sketching started life as just a few lines on a page, and then, through a series of more and more detailed drawings, was transformed from a figment of the imagination into a monument on the London skyline. The car that brought me here today was once nothing more than a sketch on a designer's drawing board. The same's true of my mobile phone, my suit, drawings everywhere. There's no end to the pleasure of unlocking the secrets of drawing. It has so much to say about how artists think, look at the world, express themselves on the page, and about how we communicate with each other, telling stories through the timeless language of pictures. But first, I'll be looking at how we've used drawing to get to grips with the world around us, to grasp its beauty, but also to grapple with our own place within it. I'll be tracing the stories of some remarkable people, a series of pioneers who were the first to visually capture many of the wonders of our planet. I'll be following in their footsteps. I'll be, so to speak, taking a line for a walk, and through the drawn image, exploring the world's animals, its landscape, and our own human selves. You might think it's a ridiculous claim to say that drawing is so important it can be the difference between life or death. But sometimes it can be. This is Francis Wells, one of the UK's leading heart and chest surgeons. Every day he performs operations that can transform people's lives. It's an intense, exacting process that requires extreme concentration. So often, before he gets to work with the scalpels and forceps, he prepares himself with pen and paper.
Surgery is all hand-eye coordination, and all surgery happens up there, not there. The surgery, what makes a good surgeon is decision-making during the operation. For example, this is sitting in my office. It's a scrap of headed notepaper where I was just working out how I might do a particular operation before I went to do it, thinking of where the incisions are and what to do. This is not done as a drawing to be exhibited. This is a personal drawing to think about what I'm actually about to do. And if you're not afraid of drawing, then it's a wonderful tool. Can I have the forceps? So, we're just using this as an exercise, but also to show truly. We had mitral valve, we had a cleft all the way back.
But Wells doesn't stop at using drawing in preparation for surgery. He can also be found sketching at the end of actual cardiac operations. In these situations, his medium changes from pen on paper to patient's blood on paper. It might look strange, but what he's doing is sharing knowledge, giving an instant replay of the procedures to those around him.
I made a The operation has a pace about it. You can't just stop every 5 minutes and say, well, you know, this, that and the other. So I find it a very good way when the operation's literally finished, the bit inside the heart, and you're waiting for the heart just to restore normal rhythm and so forth. You can actually convey what you might be doing in an operation. It is actually a wonderful medium to draw in, because in cardiac surgery you dilute the blood, and you can have blood that's pure blood or blood that is slightly diluted. And as one knows with people like Turner and so forth who use different strengths of media, you can actually use different strengths of blood, and it really does produce some wonderful pictures.
The tradition of drawing as a medium used by those in the world of science as much as the world of art is centuries old. It was, after all, one of the first ways in which we understood human anatomy and how our bodies function. So it is that Wells's exacting surgical skills have been shaped by a remarkable series of studies made around 500 years ago by the great master of the Italian Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci.
There's no anatomy book ever produced over time that can match the beauty of these drawings. You pick up these drawings and the sheer beauty of them. It is not just someone who can think and can apply sort of constructive thought. He can draw in such an engaging and beautiful way that you want to look at the drawings for other reasons. That is why I say even now, even in 1,000 years' time, you can have a dialogue with these drawings.
Leonardo began his groundbreaking studies in the late 1400s, initially so he would better understand what made up the bodies that he drew and painted. Curiously, he had no actual training in anatomy or dissection. His research was ultimately a kind of giant compulsive project to satisfy his own voracious curiosity. For Leonardo, to study the functioning of the body was, in a way, to understand the soul. Among the greatest are these immensely complex drawings of the human skull. They're beautifully drawn, beautifully precise, full of rich detail, right down to the structures of the teeth. And in this one, he even attempts to pinpoint the seat of the soul, the sensus communis, hitting on what we now know to be the pineal gland. To draw is to look and look again, to take nothing for granted. Drawing was how Leonardo saw and thought, how he unlearned the mistakes of medieval anatomy and grasped some of the human body's most intimate secrets. In some cases, it would be hundreds of years before science finally caught up.
For example, if he describes the mechanism by which what you eat in your stomach doesn't spill back into your throat all the time. And that has only been worked out in the last few years. And the way he's thought through this predates modern thought absolutely. He drew from what he regarded as the truth with honest insight and observation. So you can actually start to communicate with him, and if you do that and you take these drawings seriously, there is information here which is relevant to modern day cardiac surgery.
Really?
Absolutely.
In the early 1500s, Leonardo's project culminated in a series of obsessively intricate studies of the human heart. And in a truly across-the-centuries collaboration, Francis Wells has actually used them as the basis for a pioneering form of surgery. He's studied how Leonardo broke down all the individual components of the heart, its openings and closings, the way the muscles expand and contract, how blood flows in and out, but, most importantly, how the valves operate. Leonardo had been studying the behaviour of liquids at the same time. He worked on dams and canal systems, and I think that must have helped him to understand the liquid engineering of the heart. One of his great insights was the realisation that the coils or vortices formed by blood flow are a vital part of the closure mechanism of the mitral valve, a fundamental component of the heart's efficient functioning. Leonardo's insight has led Francis Wells actually to change the way he operates on the mitral valve. And I know for a fact that the procedure, call it the Da Vinci cut, has been turning people who could barely walk into people who can run up the stairs 2 at a time.
Do you think that these drawings contain within them other
things that people haven't still quite twigged yet, if one, you know.
Oh, I'm sure there are. I mean, one has to be careful in not romancing it too much and saying the solution to all our problems are here. They're not. But I think the essence of what we're seeing is someone who is absolutely conspicuously honest. They're searching for the truth. Nowadays, by thinking about these observations that he made and taking it seriously, it can take you down lines of thought that you might work out yourself with other information that's available.
Leonardo's project was very much in keeping with the spirit of inquiry of the Italian Renaissance, a time when science, art and philosophy were all part of the same bubbling melting pot. The Renaissance biographer Vasari, never a man to avoid going over the top, wrote that Leonardo was marvellously endowed by heaven with beauty, grace and talent in such abundance that he leaves other men far behind. But he didn't leave everyone behind. And another dramatic leap forward in our understanding of the natural world also occurred in Italy, less than a century after Leonardo's death. Here in Rome in 1603, an organisation was founded that gave new impetus to the Renaissance cross-pollination of fine art and the natural sciences, the Accademia dei Lincei, the Academy of the Lynxes, named after the all-seeing eye of that sharp-witted animal. The group was a sort of cross between a scientific academy and a gentleman's club. It even numbered Galileo among its ranks. But in the field of drawing, the academy is significant for one man, its eccentric driving force, Cassiano del Pozzo. Cassiano recognised that he was living through a sudden explosion of new scientific knowledge, the period that saw the invention of the microscope and the telescope, optical tools that enabled new ways of seeing and of drawing. Now, drawing became very important to Cassiano as a way of feeding his own insatiable scientific curiosity, and he conceived the extraordinary idea of commissioning a vast collection of scientific drawings, one that was to contain all of human knowledge, as well as convey that knowledge in a direct visual form. It was a vastly ambitious scheme, and he called it Il Museo Cartaceo, the Paper Museum. Under the lynx-like gaze of the Lincei's present-day director, I was allowed to look at some of the drawings which the Academy still owns. Cassiano spread the word about his great project all over Europe and commissioned hundreds of artists from many different countries to depict anything and everything the natural world had to offer. 400 years on, the drawings are still spellbinding. These vibrantly coloured depictions of different species of birds look as if they might have just been completed yesterday. The reach of the Paper Museum was widespread. The living, the dead, animal, vegetable, mineral. Not just one type of artichoke, for example, but every type of artichoke. By the time the project reached completion, it numbered around 15,000 drawings and watercolours in total. But if you really want to uncover the secrets of the Museo Cartaceo, you need access to the Royal Library at Windsor, because, in one of his emphatically least mad moments, George III bought the lion's share of the surviving drawings in 1762, and they've been here ever since. Cassiano was a multifaceted man, but if he had one interest above all others, it was ornithology. So it's no wonder that some of the most spectacular drawings in the Paper Museum feature birds, like this almost life-size pelican, caught in wonderful living colour. But turn to just a few other sheets from the more than 5,000 kept here at Windsor, and you quickly get a sense of their almost bewildering variety. There are drawings of all sorts of things. A mutant two-headed melon. Some Roman cutlery and cooking utensils. A vastly detailed depiction of a civet cat. A little too detailed, if you ask me. As well as being a museum, it's a paper labyrinth. So to guide me through the maze, I turned to expert Martin Clayton. The Paper Museum, I think almost of it sometimes as a kind of intellectual road system, where you've got these roads that lead nowhere and then these big highways that do seem to point towards the future of science.
But it's only in retrospect that you can see that, of course. They didn't know those roads were going to lead nowhere, so they investigated every phenomenon of nature that they could to see what would come of it.
And was this, what's this then?
This is broccoli, a monstrous broccoli.
A monstrous broccoli.
Yes. And we have to assume it's life-size. They used a microscope for some investigations, but little is magnified in this way, and so we assume that this was a monstrous broccoli.
And it falls into the category of the freak of nature.
Exactly.
Well, it's so lovely to see them.
This is one of the many hundreds of drawings of antiquities which Cassiano collected. It's one of 8 drawings of a find presumably in a tomb in central Italy, a Samnite set of armour. And Cassiano had 8 drawings from different artists of different pieces of this armour. From the same grave, we have this beautiful, beautiful drawing of 2 sides of the breastplate.
Wow.
You can see the puncture wound which goes in there and
that's
coming out there. This is one of very few drawings, maybe the only drawing that we can identify in Cassiano's collection, from the hand of Nicolas Poussin.
This is by Poussin?
Yeah. On the grounds of style, I think we can be pretty sure about that. He was, of course, one of the great artists of the 17th century in Rome, and Cassiano was his greatest patron. He owned 40 paintings by Poussin. But this is the only drawing that Poussin seems to have executed for the Paper Museum.
In fact, it's one of the few drawings that can be attributed to any specific artist. For the most part, the individual plates Cassiano compiled, often bound into beautiful volumes by subject matter, are done in a straightforward, objective style. The thing itself was what really mattered. The thing, in this tome, being Roman antiquities, both beautiful and bizarre. What are these, Roman
spoons?
Spoons?
The back of a mirror.
Oh, that's beautiful.
This is nice. You have the front and back of the same object.
Is that a man with a penis on his head?
Yes, it's a man with a penis on his head. It's a good luck charm, and it records that it was in the collection of Cardinal Barberini, so...
Good old Cardinal Barberini. Oh, dear. You could look at the Paper Museum and think, what an outlandish eccentricity. Every piece of plant life, every fruit, every mushroom. But behind this wonderful cornucopia of images lies a serious purpose. The Paper Museum's the very foundation stone of modern science. It established the ground rules for empirical scientific research. It may have taken years and years of drawing, but what it said was this: in human knowledge, no progress can ever be made without finding out everything you can about everything there is. Cassiano looked at everything, but sometimes insight comes when you focus on just one thing, drawing it again and again to get to its very essence. For me, no one demonstrates this more clearly than the great 18th century artist and scientist, George Stubbs. His fixation on his principal subject, the horse, culminated in some of the most viscerally brilliant anatomical drawings the world has ever seen. So what was it that drew Stubbs to the subject that was going to preoccupy him for virtually his entire working life? Well, in the first place, I think it was simply money. He recognised that there was a great opportunity in mid-18th century England for a painter who could truly master the anatomy of this splendid animal, because the principal patrons of the time, the milords of Georgian England, were themselves fascinated by horses, by their breeding, by their racing, by riding them. And they wanted an artist who could paint their animals more accurately than any artist before. But as Stubbs became really involved in the subject, as he delved deeper and deeper into the anatomy of the horse, rather like Leonardo. He ended up discovering much more than he needed simply to paint the animal. In fact, he created one of the great artistic, scientific projects of investigation of the entire 18th century. Stubbs was truly a master of the equine form. His ability to capture the weight and grace and poise of the animal is thrillingly visible in this portrait. And it really is a portrait, not just a horse painting. Whistle Jacket. A picture that glorifies the majestic animal against a boldly blank background. His genius in capturing this pose was a direct result of the scrupulous anatomical drawings he'd produced a few years earlier. Drawings that got him, quite literally, right inside the structure of his specialist subject. I think one of the most impressive things about Stubbs is the sheer obsessiveness with which he went about studying the anatomy of the horse. You have to imagine this. Here he is. He's a young provincial portrait painter, the son of a tanner from Liverpool. He's got very little money, but he's got this great ambition, these grand ideas. So he saves and he saves, all the while going about the drudgery of painting the faces of Lord What's-His-Name and Lady Whoever, until he's finally hoarded enough cash to take a whole year and a half of his life out to pursue pure research. This was unheard of at the time. He was taking a great risk with his career. So what does he do? He rents an isolated farmhouse in the middle of the countryside, and he procures the carcasses of a number of dead horses, and he begins to study them. He even erects a complicated series of winches and pulleys so that he can draw them in positions that they might have assumed in life. At times, he studies an individual carcass so deeply and for so long that the body rots, and there's an incredible stench. The air is thick with flies. The carcass is seething with maggots. Talk about immersing yourself in your subject matter. Stubbs would take the animal apart stage by stage, so that skin would give way to muscle, then the veins and nerves, and finally the skeleton, all the while studying with a razor-sharp analytical eye. They're among the great hidden treasures of the Royal Academy, and they're great works of art in their quality of tone and line. But I also think they're apt symbols of Stubbs's muscular, totally unsentimental intelligence. Thinking about the horse led him to redraw the bigger picture of world science. He was one of the first thinkers to see through the old biblical myth that man was created apart from the animals. And in Stubbs's Comparative Anatomy, a series of very late drawings, you can feel his intense curiosity about the similarities between the human skeleton, the tiger, and the humble chicken. If we're so different, you can sense him wondering, how come our structure has so much in common with theirs? He was asking the question that would soon force an answer from Charles Darwin in the shape of the theory of evolution. Stubbs's project wasn't simply a byproduct of the English gentry's horse mania. It was absolutely in keeping with the European Enlightenment's drive for the rapid progress of all human knowledge. And not just knowledge about our own earthly planet. Since Galileo's Renaissance fascination with telescopes and astronomy, it was thought that to truly understand who we were, we had to explore the mysteries of the universe. This idea came to obsess another 18th century Englishman, the portrait painter John Russell. In 1764, Russell got his first chance to look at the moon through a telescope, and that was it. He never quite recovered from the experience. He drew a sketch of it, his first actual record of what he'd witnessed. But when he got his hands on 2 telescopes of his own, that was when his great project really began. Over a period of 20 years, he built up a series of incredibly detailed studies of the moon's surface. Looking through the telescope, transcribing, looking again. Often he'd stay up all through the night because that was when a particular part of the moonscape was clearest. The most monumental product of all his labours was this fantastic, beautiful drawing, really a huge work in coloured pastels, which is 5 feet square. Russell was so meticulous in his approach that he even designed his own crayons to execute it. As far as he was concerned, his was to be the biggest and most accurate depiction of the moon's surface ever made. And so accurate is it that you could easily mistake it for a photograph at first glance. But if you think this is impressive, you should see the hidden stash of detailed sketches he did in preparation for it. Over 180 still exist, a couple of them bizarre flights of fancy, with an angel hovering against the lunar surface. But Russell was meticulous, making complex notes in a shorthand invented by Lord Byron. These drawings truly are a well-kept secret. But how much do they really tell us? I put the question to the man who recently attempted to launch a rocket, not to the moon, but to Mars. Head of the Beagle 2 space mission, Professor Colin Pillinger.
As Russell said, they were a snapshot in time of the moon. He used to organise his days so that he could observe at night, but he would only observe about 10 days of the month. And his, they're not so good as a historical record because he was particularly fascinated by painting only, the moon during the first quarter.
But that's fantastic, isn't it?
That is fantastically detailed. You couldn't wish for something as good as that with a camera almost.
If you took a bit of time over it, do you think you could actually
Absolutely,
identify?
no doubt you could identify the craters individually from these pictures.
That's
another one.
wonderful.
Another one. There would be absolutely no problem at all. You can see here where the moon is only 250,000 miles away with a 6-inch telescope, which is what he used. You could get extraordinarily detailed things, and you could imagine him presumably thinking, well, it would be nice to go there. That is just fantastic. It's again this picture of the light formed on the limb of the moon, where you can see the deep shadows when you get close to the edge.
Do you think he would have been keen to sign up for the Apollo project?
Oh, undoubtedly, but he presumably would have been one of those people that they probably would have wanted to take, because in those days, like when the voyages of Darwin, they didn't have a camera, so they would take an artist.
Exactly.
So Russell would have probably been enlisted for the Apollo program. He'd have been on the 4th mission, taking along to draw the craters.
He would have been in heaven.
He would have been definitely in heaven. I'm sorry that's a pun, but.
Russell's lunar mission was, in its way, a parallel to Stubbs's intensive studies of the inside of the horse. Both were working painters with clients to satisfy. Both had a private obsession that preoccupied them in their spare hours for years on end. And what strikes me as most comparable about them is that they both seem to point the way to so much in the future of science and exploration.